How are you guys? Good, 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 good. Carol Smith, my husband's last name is Smith, but I don't go by Smith, but I like the way you have Davis Smith up there. I'm excited to be here to introduce Carol and just say welcome to you guys this morning. I'm with Cox Communications, as it was just mentioned, Sharon Fanto. I've been with Cox for 20 years, and I'm proud to say that this company is based here in Atlanta. How many of you are in Atlanta for the first time? Okay, just a couple. Good. Well, welcome. How many of you been to the ballpark? Have seen Truist Park? You are in for a treat tonight. Tonight, when you go to the wonderful things happening, it's a really amazing way to have you see Atlanta. And they happened to win the World Series last year. You guys all know that. Being with Cox for 20 years, I have the opportunity to see the many different businesses that we buy, partner, develop, and many names you may not know. Cox Communication owns Cox Automotive, and Cox Automotive owns Kelley Blue Book and Auto Trader, and many other names that are part of the umbrella of Cox Automotive. Cox ProSite came into existence several years ago as it was being built to deliver IoT solutions for specifically hospitals. How many of you are familiar with RTLS? Some of you very familiar. How many of you have RTLS installed in your facilities? Okay. So I don't need to say the fact that finding assets and having a solution that makes it easy is a godsend, right? But having a complete solution that makes it easy with battery changes and not having to maintain that yourself, having a Bluetooth low energy on Wi-Fi is what Cox ProSite RTLS solution is. Our booth is 308. I put some brochures on your chairs so that if you'd like to come over and see a demo, it is not just with asset tracking. It's a full extensible platform solution that integrates with your EMR, EHR, etc. Please come visit because that's why we're here. And I'd love to spend a little bit more time with you and give you a demo and answer any other questions. But thank you for having us, and we appreciate being here to introduce Carol Davis Smith.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm going to go ahead and let Carol get started. Since we do have virtual attendees, if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, I'll come over and bring the microphone to you. We just don't want them to miss out on that question that you'll be asking. Carol, take it away.
Beautiful. Thank you. And everybody out there in Webland, thanks for all of you here in the room and on Webland for taking some time out, selecting this session. Sharon, thank you. Cox and ProSite, you and your team for being here. And for introducing this session, and of course the MD Expo team for putting this meeting together for all of us. So I'm very appreciative and humbled to have the opportunity. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on figuring out this clicker. Oh, good, it's working. Today, I think some of you have heard me speak on some of these topics, but I want to put a little different spin on it today, where we'll focus on how does data, capital planning and procurement, and service contract management kind of all come together, right? Oftentimes in our day-to-day, we are kind of looking at these all individually, like their own little silo, right? But today, let's take a moment to sort of step out of the rush and think about how they interrelate to each other, how they support each other, how they're dependent upon each other, with the objective that we're really shooting for optimal decision making, right, in our organizations. We want to make that the best decision we can. And oftentimes, we're unable to do that because we don't have sort of those cogs working well together, right? Or one part of it is a little wonky. So let's talk today about how we can prepare and how we can deliver and support our organizations, even if the outcome, even if the decision is something that we personally might think, well, I would have done something different. At least we can come out of that meeting feeling like a thoughtful, strategic decision was made, and the people who made it know what was on the table and what they left on the table or what they took off the table, right? And I think that's probably the best service that we can provide as the HTM community to our organizations when it comes to more of these strategic sort of activities. Okay. The acquisition process, sort of the top of the technology life cycle, right? It occurred to me as I was pulling this together, one of the first things we want to think about is that warranty is really no more than a service contract, right? So as soon as we buy a widget, we're already into worrying about service contracts and managing them, potentially, if that's our service strategy. We may also be thinking about what's our in-house. It may be something that we already have. We've got an in-house strategy. But sooner or later, we're going to have to look at all of these. But let's not forget that one of the first places those cogs meet, data, service contracts, and acquisition, is right here when we buy the widget to begin with. And as you all know, in the day-to-day life, it doesn't stop there. As we move through the life cycle, right? We certainly are used to managing the service contracts in the course of operations and maintenance, right? Things come off of that warranty, that initial service contract. Hopefully, in the acquisition process, we talked about and created a strategy for what our care and feeding was going to be for this widget over its life cycle, right? So we know, are we going to move on to what? Are we moving to an in-house? Are we moving to an ISO? Are we moving to the OEM? Are we going run to fail? What are we doing? What's our strategy, right? So that's very familiar territory to everybody in the room, I'm sure. But it comes back to us again at the end of the life cycle, when we have to decide, are we going to upgrade this thing? You know, it doesn't work for us anymore, right? Can I upgrade it and then it can work for me again? Am I going to reallocate it because it's a perfectly good piece of technology and somebody else in my organization can use it? Am I going to trade it in? Am I going to have to completely replace? What am I doing here? Well, that's where the data comes back in again. Have you been managing your service contract, whether that's in-house, your contract with your organization, or have you been managing the service contract you have with an external resource, you know, an ISO, an OEM, whomever? And what does that data tell you, right? What was the performance during warranty? What was the performance over its regular operations and maintenance sort of life? Do you have all that data to make a good decision about what you're going to do with that device at the end of life, right? Because now you're back at the beginning of that acquisition strategy and acquisition cycle, right? Circle of life. Okay. So it starts with the data. That's sort of the underlying theme. That's the foundation. How many of you had the opportunity to hear either the Amy webinar or one of the other webinars that myself and my cohort in crime, Matt Baratich, did to talk about the CMMS Collaborative? Anybody seen that? A few people, a couple people? Anybody read the white paper? A couple of nodding heads. Okay. Al, you don't count. You helped write the paper. So, all right. So let me take a quick sidebar here. The CMMS Collaborative is a group sponsored by Amy that brought the CMMS, the major CMMS suppliers, the folks that probably all of you have in your hospitals, right, together. And Matt and I had the pleasure of facilitating this conversation. And we began looking at CMMS data, blinded and in giant piles, thanks to our friends at Superior Analytics, as well as each of the individual CMMS vendors. And we talked about two things. We started with failure codes. And then we went on, we realized that as we looked at failure codes, there was a real problem with how we as a community call out or describe work order types. And so if you can imagine, we looked at literally millions of work order data to just looking at those fields. Like, what were all the different failure codes that were used? What were the different work order types used? And so the initiative, which is phase 1, phase 2, there's 2 white papers, and I encourage you to go out and get them. They're free. Just download them from the website. We distilled it down to 2 lists, a list of recommended work order types, which allow you to separate your maintenance from non-maintenance work, right? And then under those, you know, like maintenance are things like your scheduled work and your corrective maintenance and things like that. And then, and I don't have all the lists in this presentation. I could certainly help you get that. But, and then the non-maintenance are things like the projects that you're involved with, the meetings that you might have to go to, and all those sorts of things, so that you can then look at what your program is doing from a high level, and it also is a shorter list, so your techs don't have to scroll through 427 different, like, what should I pick? Because we all know, if it were me, I'd be like, what are the first 5? Yeah, that's close enough, right? I mean, I got stuff to do, right? So let's not make it harder than it needs to be on our teams. So we did the same thing with failure codes, only there were even more of those, and there were lots of things in there that were not failures, right? So we sort of sorted things out, and we created a list. And the nice thing about both of these is we define them. There's some definitions in there. Now, you're going to have to make some decisions in your organization, policy decisions, like, okay, team, here we're going to use these, and here's how we're going to use them. So we had tons of conversation around things like, I just had a moment, meetings or projects. Like, is that maintenance work or not? And should that be over here? You just need to make the rules. And the key word throughout this whole presentation and what I'm saying now is consistency, right? Be consistent. That way you can work with your data. So we'll stop there, read those backgrounds. My contact info is going to be at the end. So if you have questions, happy to, as well as talk to your CMMS vendors. So like Al Grush and the others in the room, Doug Brown and the team at Ames and EQ2, and I'm forgetting people here. So, but talk to the CMMS vendors because they are all part of this. They helped create this because they want to enable their programs to enable you and not disable you. Okay, so happy to talk about that more with folks afterwards. Okay, so let's all assume we've read the white papers and we're working on our having really good data, because when it comes to trying to make a decision about should we buy a new piece of equipment, whatnot, we go through an evaluation process, right? And how many of you are involved with providing information for the capital planning or procurement? Fair number? So probably some of these are really familiar to you. You can probably tell them the quote unquote end of life, or what maybe some information about maintenance history and whatnot. And so over the years, I've worked with a number of organizations, and those are sort of some of the, but I call those the technical criteria. There's some of the criteria that's used by your administration to make those decisions. So end of life, to me, is it still manufactured or is it still service? That's data that comes from the manufacturer. You kind of got to go research that. May or may not be in your CMMS. If you have it, put it in your CMMS. It makes your life so much easier. You don't have to go digging for it, right? Chronological age, which is typically like when it was installed. When was it born into your organization, right? I can't tell you the number of places that don't have that in their CMMS. Put it in there. It's not the end all be all of making decisions, but it's so helpful. It's so helpful. And then reliability. And this is where I want to spend more time. And I have the big caution sign up there for that whole thing, that whole sidebar I just did on data. If your data is not good, how are you going to know how many corrective work orders you had? If you got meetings and projects and whatever all mixed in there, how are you going to do mean time between failures if your failure codes are not clean, right? So that's the big cautionary tale here, is to do these calculations, you really need to make sure that data is clean and ready to go. And so this is another place to talk to your CMMS supplier, because in some organizations I work with, they have to pull the data out and work on it. We build outside spreadsheets, which is fine. You can do that. In other cases, some of these things you don't have to do the calculation outside of CMMS. You could just pull those calculations, those values out of the CMMS to use with the other things that I'm going to show you here in just a minute. Okay, so data, have it clean, have it ready. And remember, that's not one thing. You're looking for sort of triangulating. What are the important things about my equipment from a technical perspective that I can provide to my organization? And these are the big ones. You know, reliability is huge here, because this can really tell the story about, you know, if somebody wants to say my device is not, it's never available, you can support or refute that claim with data, right? But you got to be able to say, and my data's good. Let me show you, okay? All right, I'm not going to walk through the math, you guys know, but the one thing I want to point out, oh no, what did I do? See, that's why they never let me touch the tools, right, Tony? When you're doing these calculations, one of the things you have to do in your organization is do a little bit of risk tolerance analysis. And by that, I mean, how risk tolerant, how much risk is your organization, not just your department, but your organization willing to assume? I have worked in organizations that are like, whatever you think is best, Carol, you and your team know. And then I've had others that are like, we don't want any risk, no risk. By the way, the response of, well, we should probably not see patients anymore is not a good one. Management lesson 101. But set this, so like maybe plus or minus 10% is what you think is reasonable for that reliability to change, because you're comparing it over its lifetime to maybe the last 12 months. That's what I normally recommend. What's it been doing in the last 12 months compared to its life? Is it going up? Is it steady? Is it dropping? What's it doing in terms of reliability? Okay. Now, the reason you want to be able to pull that out is, again, because your organization's looking not just at technical data, which is our bread and butter, but it's also looking at financial. Now, one of the other things that you probably provide on a fairly regular basis is this cost of service ratio down here at the bottom. The other two are typically, again, the acquisition costs. That's something that hopefully you have in your CMMS, so you can pull that, right? And pull that right away. And then you can also, you're probably going to have to go to your finance department to have the depreciation. Although I have run into some organizations that have that information in their CMMS, but it's there. It's somewhere in your organization. But when we get down to this one, the cost of service ratio, again, you got to have the data. You got to have that maintenance data, because what's the numerator? Total service cost, right? You got to know the hours. You got to know the cost of parts and materials, all of that. And so you need that really clear understanding of how much of that is scheduled. You knew you were going to have this when you bought it, and how much of that is corrective, unscheduled, unanticipated, so to speak. Now, the place that falls apart, I see the most out in the field, is when you have selected, this is sort of shift over here in the relationship of the service contract. If you have selected a service contract to partner with somebody on the outside to do some level of your service, I see that missing in lots of people's data. Not capturing what your partner, what your service partner is doing in your CMMS, right? And so when you calculate some things, if it's fully outsourced, all you can say is, well, I paid this much in a service contract, right? Because maybe you don't have all the other costs in there, because we all know that there's always, yeah, that was excluded. That wasn't included. Here, that's an extra charge or whatnot over the course, okay? So that's a big, I probably should have a big caution flag on this one too, but when you're collecting that data about the service delivery, make sure it's captured in your CMMS so that this is truly the cost to service and not just an initial contract price, not one and done. So the idea then is that you're merging these, and quite honestly, you're going to merge both of these, and I'm not forgetting the clinical. Most of you know I am a huge advocate of our clinical partners, but today we're going to focus on just on these two areas of technical and financial data. You're going to pull those together. All right, and we sort of talked about this, so we'll move on. Same sort of thing. What's your cost of service? What's your tolerance? So make sure you know what your tolerance is, right? Is that a good cost of service or a bad cost of service? Is it going up? Is it going down? I prefer trends over individual numbers. That's my nurse mentors, screaming in my head. It's not about one number. It's about the trend of the patient over the life or period of time. Okay. So you're going to merge those, because now if we're in the midst of supporting it, or it's just come out of warranty, we've got to go through all that process. You're going to use both of those things, the technical and the financial data, the things you learned during the warranty period, right? To say, was my strategy, is my service strategy still valid? Do I still want to do this in-house? Do I still want to do this externally? Do I need to make any adjustments there based on what I learned from the data I have collected during that initial period, right? Or maybe I'm buying another one. So now I have history on the first one that informs my procurement decision on the second one, okay? So these things are all interrelated. They're not separate. They're always interrelating and providing, informing, and potentially dependent on each other. Okay, and before we leave this in this crazy, like, are you guys seeing it like flicker there? Okay, it's not. I'm not having a stroke, right? Thanks, Tony. Love you too. This is something I don't think we think about all the time. Remember that an in-house program is a service contract. It's a service contract between you and the people that employ you, right? And if you think about it that way, it helps you manage it more like a business, right? And you get more consistent with your behaviors, because if you're going to track all this for yourself, then you know what to track from your external partners, right? So if you think of that way, that not that you're separate from the hospital, but you've made a contract, you've made a bond, if you will, with your employer, and you've made commitments. It sometimes helps you sort of structure your whole data gathering along the way. All right, so we've talked a lot about that top part there. Let's look at how you're actually going to apply the data things that we talked about into the process. So, oh, and the other thing I want to say, and I think hopefully I said at the beginning, is the acquisition is not just acquisition of the widget, it's the acquisition of the support strategy as well. Whether you're doing that together or following on, it's really the same sort of process. And certainly these first two phases you should be doing as you select whatever external resources, whether it's parts or all the way up to full service. How are you doing these two pieces of the process? Okay. So this is just a dummy example of a spreadsheet that I provide to my clients. And I show it to you because this is where we start merging that data, okay? So they get what I call a technical score, which is the sum of the end of life. Is it out of manufacture, it's no longer being made, plus there is or is not service available? Then the second sub-score has to do, in this particular case, this I don't know why we called it serviceability, but basically that's the chronological age. It's kind of an old slide because that confused everybody. I don't know whose decision that was, probably Tony's. And then the reliability thing, and this is where we decide what is it that we're going to measure in our organization. This is back, did we look at number of corrective work orders? Did we want to look at just the hours? Did we want to look at the parts? Did we want to look at the sum of those? Did we want to look at mean time between failure? But this is where we use that data to calculate what was that number for the life of that device. So that's why we needed this age, the chronological age. And then what has it been doing over the last 12 months? And we compared them. So that was that equation we had before. Then we merge the three. We take the reliability score, the serviceability score, and the end of life score. And that gives you your roll-up technical score. Sometimes, lots of times, because you don't want to overcomplicate this thing. Keep it simple, keep it understandable, right? Sometimes it's just a simple sum. You may have a reason though in your organization to say we need to weight something. But that, again, be consistent, right? As you put your process in place and your procedures in place for how you're going to do this sort of scoring, just be consistent so that everybody understands the rules of the game, because that's what frustrates us now, right? We don't always know what the rules of the game are, and it feels like they always change. And wait, last week you wanted this, and this week you want something completely different, right? So consistency is one of the game changers here. So this, you'll see there's no cost of service thing in here. That's because there's a whole nother spreadsheet that looks like this with those financial measures. So we have a column that does cost of service and how has it changed from, I look at my program, or I look at and I can look at it the program, or I'm looking, in this case, we're illustrating it for individual devices. What's the cost of service of that calculated over its whole life? What's the last 12 months been? Has it turned into just a real beast and taken a shot up, or has it stayed pretty steady state? That's one thing that you can keep in mind. If it's steady state, maybe you can sweat it a little longer. If it's actually gotten easier to service over, the last few, 5-6 years, maybe you want to keep it even longer, because it's not, as long as it's clinically acceptable and whatnot. These are sort of some of those insights that you'll get if you have the data and you're looking at it in a trended fashion as opposed to a single figure or a single value. Okay. And so then there's ways that then you merge this technical score with the financial score. And that's where it gets a little hairier, and we'll go into that in other presentations. But you start looking at what's driving your organization, right? But on the financial one, you'll have provided this sort of cost of service, because that is truly a financial measure. That's not a technical measure, that's a financial measure. So you combine that with your depreciation, because anybody in here able to replace equipment if it still has money on the books? Yeah, that's not happening. I mean, it has to be a super dog for that thing to get released. So that allows you to do that. Okay. You could do the same sort of, you could create this same sort of graph, change what you're measuring if you're evaluating the service contract for something, right? You could look at what's the reliability of my vendor. Maybe you're doing it for the vendor, for your external partner. Maybe you're doing it for your own department, right? What's our internal reliability been? How responsive have we been, right? So you can score yourself and how you're delivering goods, or you could use this as a tool just like you would if you were buying the CT or the patient monitoring system, and create the metrics that would allow you to say, is this a good service strategy decision? What are my options? How would I rack and stack them, right? Okay. Yeah, and that for okay. Real quick, yeah. So for the folks on the web, the comment was that in this gentleman's organization, they include what is the operating system and its status of support or not. And back on the, let's see if I can get back. No, wrong way. Where is it? Anyway, you could add that. That could be a fourth column on here, right? That could be another criteria that you blend in, add into, if that's a driver. That's an excellent point, thanks, Joe, because you have to understand what are the attributes, what are the technical attributes that are most important to report to your organization, right? And cyber is pretty a big deal right now. Yes, you absolutely have to keep your operating systems in mind. I would caution using that or any of these criteria as the sole decision maker, because in that particular example, there are devices that it really doesn't matter if the operating system isn't supported anymore because there's no options. Like anything else that's on the market is just as bad, or it's the only thing on the market, right, in that space. So you have to be careful of that. But end of life, manufacturing and service is just as bad. So one of the conversations I'm having right now with some clients is in these columns here with end of manufacturing and end of service. We're looking to add an end of service too. And that's their ability to support it even after the manufacturer says, no, I'm not going to support it, right? What's my ability as an HTM department, whether I'm performing the service myself in-house, or if I have an external partner, what's my ability to service it beyond what the manufacturer says? So I've worked with organizations that were huge, and we had so many duplicates, right? We had some things we had so many of, we could create our own parts depot. We could put our own replacement, swap out depot. Now that's a whole different discussion about how did we manage the number and quantity and types of assets we had, but sometimes it paid off because we could keep them longer because we could provide ourselves with our own parts, right? So excellent point. Thank you, Joe. All right, now if we've used this, let's sort of shift a little bit. We've had the asset. We're using this sort of methodology to evaluate perhaps our service strategy. You may or may not go into this level of detail. Totally understand. But at some point, you need to get to this level, because this is a part of the conversation you're going to have with the folks that are going to make the funding decision, right? Whether they're going to give you the money to pay the service contract or not, right? Or to pay the staff member or not. And what I like to do is understand, in this case, I'm just using benchmark acquisition. So this is like an ECRI, MD byline kind of number, right? But if your organization has that actual number and you use it like in cost of service, again, consistency, use the number for acquisition value that you have. And then looking at individual modality, what kind of device is this? Is it a biomedical? Is it an imaging? Is it a lab or whatnot? And then looking at what am I currently paying? These are all dummy numbers, by the way, just to show the math. So what am I currently paying? What's my target cost? And how do I get to the target cost is percent of value. Every industry uses this, right? And we in our industry, I mean, I've been around for 30 some years, and my mentors have shared with me benchmarks like, and we can argue this all afternoon, and I don't want to do that, but biomedical devices, 5% or less. Lots of people are saying 3% or less, all right? Imaging devices, I routinely hear 18 to 20%. I'm like, okay, if you can afford that. I'd like to see it down closer to 10 or 15, more like 10. But, I mean, the idea is you're moving it down, just like we would at home, right? When you buy an appliance, you look at what's the service contract cost, what's that relative to how much the refrigerator costs, right? Or your car or whatnot. I mean, it's the same principle, right? So there's the target cost, and then so let's just take that first one. If our target is I want to be at 5% of value, that's my target. And so what kind of savings am I going to get, compared if I negotiate this better? Or do I want to be more aggressive and shoot for 3%? And honestly, you guys are in good math. I think those are the numbers we actually used in this dummy table. And then this gives your administration options, right? If we do this, here's the cost and the potential savings. If we do this, here's the cost. If you're going to show them aggressive, though, make sure you can deliver, right? Have a plan. I mean, life happens. Life's messy. But have a plan, right? Okay? So that you can show them the numbers. Again, remember, all this goes back to you have good data about not only what does it cost, but you've decided that these target numbers are validated with your CMMS data. You've got reliability data trended over the life and over the last 12 months for something that's exactly the same or pretty similar to support that argument. Yes, sir. Yeah, let's use the microphone so folks in WebLink can hear you.
Could you please define annual contract cost? Is that internal or is that like an external contract with another third-party service provider?
Yes, all of the above, right? So it could be either one. Like, what is your service strategy? Now, I think in this 9 times out of 10, it's probably an external service provider, the OEM, an ISO, small third-party boutique firm. But it could be your internal costs as well. I'm trying to decide because maybe it's on a contract. Maybe you've been handed something from radiology or from surgery, and they've had it on a contract forever. You're going to need to be able to put in there. Because remember, internal, I'm acting like a service provider. I'm not acting, hopefully I'm doing, being a service provider to my organization. So I'm forecasting to them, this is what you would cost, right? If I'm your service, if you contract in air quotes with me, this is what I would say it's going to cost annually for this device. Does that make sense? It's non-traditional. There's a reason I'm always like, Kara, you're like, where, why, how did you think of this? Yeah, it's definitely thinking about it in a very different way.
You're trying to find a way to justify it to lower costs, bring it internally.
Mm-hmm.
My challenge is more external.
Yeah.
And negotiating, costs with third-party independent.
Right. So what does this tool enable you? So you take this sort of a tool, all right, I've got a third party, I'm keeping a third party, but I'm not sure I'm getting the best pricing. So you look at it and you say, does it meet my criteria? Back to kind of all the data, you got to set your boundaries. Here's my target costs and here's my tolerance of what I'm willing to pay. Same data idea. And then you present it to administration and your supply chain team. And don't negotiate this by yourself. Those guys are professional negotiators, right? Partner with them. Give them the ammunition they need to go in, give them the data they need to go to the supplier and say, why am I paying 20% for my CT? Why can't I pay 10? And at the end of the day, you end up, maybe 15 or 16. They stay in business because we all know if the suppliers don't stay in business, we don't have MD Expo and we don't have equipment, right? I mean, this is a symbiotic relationship. We truly all have to win here. We all have to stay in business, right? But this gives your supply chain, they don't know. They have no idea what it costs to take care of equipment, right? They just have these sort of arbitrary numbers that are in their community and swirling. We need to be better about giving them the information, the data and the information they need to enter into these agreements. Because remember, how many of you all have master service agreements in your organization? How many of you have like an individual service contract for any individual device that's on contract? I run into lots of organizations. Your supply chain team is managing 900 things and they could be managing one, right? You can set the rules of the game, and same for yourself. I mean, you kind of do by employment, right? They say, here's your budget, right? But you can set some ground rules with your supplier partners by using master service agreements to say, here's how our structure, this is what our structure is going to look like, right? And then, but that's a supply chain skill that they do fabulously. We just need to inform it. Yes, sir.
So I struggle with total cost of service ratios
We all do.
for several reasons, but one is there's a numerator and a denominator, and we are hopefully talking about a depreciated cost of an asset. Is that correct?
As long as that is the consistent number you always use. Because remember, it's a
But
ratio.
that's the heart of my question. So if I have older technology, my depreciated cost is dropping to near zero. That blows my total cost of service ratio completely to an unusable number. I mean, it goes to infinity at that point. Your cost to serve goes up with time. Your cost of your value of the device goes down with time. How does that metric actually serve at an individual device level? I don't think it does.
It depends on what you choose as the denominator. I personally.
So that's again the heart of my question. I don't see a standardization out there.
Oh,
and
there's
if there
not.
isn't, and the same reason why you're quoting 10 to 20% on a DI piece, well, that's millions and millions of dollars. So,
Right.
So I'm just,
No,
I'm kind of just trying to call for input here. Really.
Yeah, I don't have an answer because our community does not have an answer. It's something that's been debated the entire time I have been in the field. I personally would like to see a standard, and so that's why I say be consistent. I personally do not like using the depreciated value for the reason you specified right there, because it means I have to do things differently. I can't be consistent. My preference is if I'm looking to replace something, how much it cost 10 years ago is might be not relevant. What is to buy it new? What is the cost? So I will sometimes say, as well as what I paid for it 10 years ago may not be data that's easy for me to get. The original purchase price may be very difficult in many organizations to even get. So the piece of data that is easier to get to is if I were going to buy one today, what's my GPO contract price? What's my organization's contracted price? Whatnot. It's sort of a contracted number to work with, because then I can say, I can definitively say where the source is, right? There's no silver bullet here. And as a community, we haven't landed on it. And partly because our organizations don't all, if we set on a standard, we are going to run into the whole, yeah, but my organization doesn't collect that data. So let's let him finish first, Joe, and then we'll come to you.
So, and then I just have a couple comments. This is, the heart of a lot of what I'm doing right now, but I think it's important to think about this process as an evolution from point estimates to trend estimates to benchmarking.
Yes.
And I'm struggling at the benchmarking point as well for a lot of the same reasons.
Right. Right.
And then also the pitfalls of this as well. None of this substitutes for a strong business case. You know, I mean, there's so many. You can't hand this data out and then have that dictate.
Thank you for saying that. No, you are absolutely correct. These are components of. This is supporting evidence to a business case. This is not the business case. Thank you for making that point. I should have from the get-go. This is not a business case. This is supporting evidence for, because remember, there's a whole nother bit of data that we didn't cover in this course, which is the clinical drivers, right? Which may, given whatever the situation is, may completely supersede all of this. All of this may not be relevant because of a clinical need demand requirement. So thank you for saying that. Joe.
Okay, so as he was talking about skewing the numbers, a large hospital like Sutter Health can buy 6 CT scanners. They might get a $300,000 discount on each one of them.
Mhm.
And then a smaller hospital buys the same CT scanner, but they may be paying closer to list price, somewhere around $1 million.
In the same system?
Well, no, the different hospitals. So when you
No,
try
no, no.
to-
In this, is all this happening inside Sutter, or you're saying a small hospital
Outside.
somewhere else? Okay.
When they try to compare a large system to a small system, the larger system, because they have the power of discount because they're buying more. Okay,
Maybe,
their prices will have a tendency of going down.
maybe.
Buying the volume. So when you actually do that ratio,
But how often is Sutter Health going to ask you, Joe, compare me to a small hospital in North Carolina? That's not going to happen. They want to be compared to somebody like them.
actually it does happen. You know, you have CEOs who talk, what's your cost to service ratio?
But why would you compare Sutter to somebody that doesn't look like you? That doesn't even make sense.
But other people will.
Okay.
Some of the benchmarking sites
I don't
do that.
disagree. That's why I talk about this. That's why I preach this, because I've dealt with this, and we want to change things, right? We want to be educated. We want to be informed so that we can guide folks. I'm more concerned when that purchase price is different inside the same health system, because you know what? When you do these exercises, that becomes like glaringly apparent to supply chain.
Whenever they need one and they didn't bundle it together.
Well,
And
that's
they
a
have-
Joe. Let's table that, because that is that's like weeks-long seminar
Carol.
on that.
Carol, one comment I want to make to Joe's point is, and I completely understand your point, Joe, but having worked in a large IDN, I can tell you, because it's a ratio, it really comes out, because I guarantee you that what I pay for parts and service is also less than that small community hospital. So, you know, again, if you look at it as a ratio.
Right. That's why you look at it as a
Yes,
ratio,
yes.
so that it normalizes the data. That's exactly why. Oh, no, we're good. Let's wait for Webland. Yeah.
I'll get you back to where you were.
No, that's fine. We're good. No, these are all, but this is why this is so hard, right? It's not plug and play. It's not an easy button. It gets easier once you start doing it and you build sort of the muscle memory and you start cleaning your data and you start plugging in the holes. It does get easier, but it's never easy, because you have to there's decisions and there's things outside your control that really should be drivers for you to partner with your finance, your supply chain, and your clinicians. Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions from our
Great.
virtual attendees. How do you get info about the CMMS Collaborative?
Amy.org, and then in the search box, just put CMMS,
Okay.
and it will give you a choice for the 2 white papers. There'll be 2, because I just did this last week. Those 2 white papers will come up, and there is actually an easy button there. There's a download button, and then I think it might ask for your name, because they're tracking to see how much uptake there is, but it's free.
And one more question. Could you please give us an example for a reliability calculation?
Yeah, let's jump back to that.
Oh, sorry, let me get you back on there.
Oh, should I just toss this?
honestly,
Has the reliability of the clicker gone to 0?
I think you're good now. Go ahead and see if it works.
There we go. Okay. So where was that? Okay. So you need to pick what you want to measure. So let me actually, well, at the top of this slide here, and these are examples of either conversations or actual work I've done with some of my clients over the last many years in prior lives and whatnot. Okay, so you could just simply count. If what you have is a number of corrective maintenance, use that. If that's what you have, okay? And so it's a simple count. So I'm looking at, back to this, the Amy white papers, the CMMS Collaborative white papers, look at what, make sure your data is set up so that you can tell the difference between maintenance and non-maintenance. And then in your maintenance, you're looking for just the corrective maintenance work orders. Because the other one is about scheduled stuff, as I remember. There might be one other one. I'm looking at Al because he helped write the paper too as one of the suppliers. But that's the primary one you want to look at, corrective. I fixed something that was broke, that should have not been broke, right? And that's the reliability thing. You don't want to include your PMs because theoretically that's something that your scheduled maintenance is something that should keep your reliability high, right? Okay. So if what you have is just a count of those work orders, that's a great place to start. Use that. As you get more sophisticated and you actually have your team documenting their hours regularly and in a quality way, you know, you feel good about the reliability of their documentation, then maybe you can look at the number of hours, which then allows you to look at hours or the dollars that are associated with that hour. You know, your average rate or something like that, right? Or if you know the exact number. And then ultimately, if you have both of the, oh, dang it, I did it again. If you have both of those and you have the cost of materials, supplies, parts, whatever, then you can start looking at things more sophisticated. Maybe you look at both of those, or maybe you go to the mean time between those failures. Pick one though. Don't try to measure them all. Pick one that you think reflects most clearly the reliability, the status, the health of that device, if you will. Yes. Oh boy, I'm in trouble now. Yes, Ben saying. Wait. Look at the microphone so web world can hear you.
Thank you.
Just to mention something that you already said before, but maybe you have forgotten to mention here, is that you need to look at the cause of the failure, because you are not going to count, you should not count the corrective as a factor in your reliability calculation if the failure cause was an accessory, for example, or somebody accidentally dropped the infusion pump on the floor. That is not a equivalent failure. And by the way, I would suggest that you call that failure cause code and not failure code, because failure code may be power supply died. Yeah, but why the power supply died is because the lightning strike the building, then burn out a whole bunch of things. Yeah, that's
right.
Not exactly
right.
That's an act of God, if you will. Okay.
Or the power company. Yeah.
Yeah, but if the power supply burned because right. The machine is getting old and unreliable, or you have not cleaned the fan cools that down, then yeah, those are valid reasons. So you really need to qualify things properly, and that's why the failure cause code, not failure code, is so important. And now I'm not going to digress into the discussion about the cost of service ratio because I published a book called Fake News. Look that up and you'll see some of the reasoning there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vincent, because I totally agree with you. So we talked about if what you have is a simple count. To me, that's what Vincent just described is sort of the next phase, right? The next level of sophistication. If all you have, if you feel like only your work order, I know for sure this is some sort of corrective, use it. But ideally, you fixed your failure codes too. Those are the two white papers, and I hear what you're saying. The failure codes that are published are cause. What caused this failure? What's the nature of the failure? And ideally, you use both of those. You look only at the corrective maintenance, and then you look at the failure codes, and you say, I'm gonna select this, these out of the 10 or 12 that are in that list that you're using, I'm only going to use these 6 because the other ones are like what Dr. Wang was saying. There's like somebody dropped it, or it was the storm. We had a hurricane and everything just got. So yes, that is absolutely a better level of sophistication and accuracy and specificity that would make your numbers and your assessment even better. I totally agree. Wait, oh, you have the microphone. Great.
Hi there. I have a independent service organization, and I'd like to bring something up that may be helpful for the formulas. I'm working on tissue processors that are 30 to 35 years old for a lot of customers. They were $7,900 the day they were new. To replace them is between 83 and 110,000. These folks down in the basement of most hospitals in the pathology department don't get the funds.
Right.
So even though the company has not supported this for 20 years, I am able to support them.
Right.
So but when I try to go to the customers, because we are cost avoidance, and I am too, I want to help them save money. A dialysis unit gets replaced every 5 to 7 years. The scale that the patients have to be weighed on are 30 years old. We're constantly going in to fix them. I give them the reports showing them that you're spending a lot of money with me keeping them running. They still can't come up with the funds to replace them. How do you put that into the formula?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I have had the pleasure to work with organizations that found that it wasn't immediate, that is an outcome. It's one of their objectives down the road, because just like we as community are building the knowledge and the muscle memory and the muscle strength to do this ourselves, we're asking our organization to think differently as well. And so what their experience was that after a period of time, and they looked at these and they started seeing some of these repetitive things. The other thing is those old scales and the tissue processors, which I too have seen in my travels. Woo! Kudos to the people that can fix those. Is those things just they're like returning suspects. They just keep coming back because you've got so many different measures that could pop them to the top. That could be a flag that they can't completely disappear. Right? And so over time, the case builds and the mass of our ugly underbelly starts showing more and more, and somebody has to deal with it. Right? And so it's an over time, it's retraining and saying, gosh, now we're stuck. We should have done this 5 years ago. Now I got to buy a bunch of them, not like, because this is sort of the same issue with fleet management and whatnot. They move some of these things into more of a fleet management model.
And in the case of the laboratory, hematology and chemistry, their technology changes so rapidly that they have to get the new equipment.
Right, and so they're on their clinical scores, which we did not talk about today. Shoot them to the top. It's no longer clinically relevant. From a clinical perspective, it's end of life. I mean, we can fix it all day long. It's not breaking. Reliability score is wonderful. It doesn't do what I need it to do clinically. Unfortunately, the tissue processor still does what it was supposed to do all those years ago, right? So there have to be other scores that keep those things coming into field of view. The other thing is, and some of this is learning, right? Is you learning the skills and then your organization learning the skills. Some folks will do this sort of activity, but for one equipment type at a time. I'm only looking at CTs. Well, the tissue processors have no ability. They're never, right? But when you use these sort of tools to look at the whole, let's see if we can make this move forward, your full inventory, and you can, let me go this way, and you can prioritize, you can get everybody in the mix, and you can sort the columns to throw the reds to the top, because an executive red means I need to pay attention, right? The reason the colors is entirely, I always thought it was silly, but when I became an executive, I'm like, oh yeah, you got to tell me where to look, because I got 9,000 squirrels running in this room, right? Tell me which one to watch, right? So if you're looking at the whole inventory, you have the ability to just get rid of all the noise, which is all the green stuff. That stuff's fine. Don't worry about it. And get them to focus on the red that includes the CT and the tissue processor, right? So that's kind of one of the other tricks is your ability to look at everything and then drill down as you need to. Because when you get to the business case part, you got to drill down to sometimes the asset level if we're talking big iron, or to the fleet level if we're talking defibs, beds, tissue processors, those sorts of things. And then even in the course of building that business case, one of the other things I like to do is, again, keeping it simple, is what's the easy stuff, right? What's that low-hanging fruit stuff versus, you know, what is like, we should have done it last Tuesday. It's that kind of stuff. Versus the moderate, you know what? I might need to get somebody a little more training, or I might need to do a vendor analysis, or I might need to come up with a parts supplier. There's a little bit, I got a little bit of homework to do, but it's not insurmountable, right? I might have to have one conversation with somebody in the department, right? It's not insurmountable, but it's going to take some time, right? And then there's the stuff. Then there's the stuff that is significant. I got a lot of heavy lifting to do here, right? I got to talk to 3 department heads and 6 SVPs and the president of the world, right? I got to get dispensation for this. And I have a lot of homework to do, right? So you can prioritize, even within the red and yellow bands, you can prioritize that work as well, which also helps them make decisions and helps them allocate funding a little faster as well. Okay. So I think, you know, that does bring us. Oh, question.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions regarding your service contract slide, the first one. Can you explain a little bit further regarding the target cost? I'm not quite understanding.
Sure.
I know these are hypothetical numbers.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you mentioned 5% of biomed equipment and 10 to 15% for imaging equipment. Can you also explain those percentages, what it relates to?
I can explain it mathematically, but I think Dr. Wang will laugh with me going, I'm not sure I can explain the logic behind it. But so yeah, so target cost is what I believe I should be able to support this piece of equipment under normal, reasonable conditions. Okay. And it's a percentage, 5, 10, 15, whatever, of the acquisition value that you used in your other calculations. Consistency, right? Don't pick a new acquisition number now, right? Stay consistent with that number. So it's a percentage of the value. So think about your personal life is, you know, when you buy a piece of capital, so to speak, you buy a home, you buy a car, you buy an appliance, you know, whatever. I mean, you think about, if I'm going to support this, what's it going to cost me to own this? Or maybe I'm the only one that drives my husband nuts that we have to do a whole tech assessment and a value analysis before we buy anything. He's like, I'll be over in the TV section. So it's that same principle, okay? And then the aggressive one is if I work really hard, if my external partner works really hard, whatever your service strategy is, then I could go from 5% to 3%, or from 15% to 10%, or whatever it might be. Does that make sense? No, I've forgotten what the other question was.
No, just I think you answered
the question. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get through. How are we doing on time? Are we good?
We're almost about at time, but keep on going.
Keep on going.
It's okay.
So this slide is really meant to say, if you do all that homework and you use it as components of the business case, along with the clinical piece that we didn't talk about today, then you get to this part of the acquisition process, whether you're buying the widget with its warranty, and ideally in the value analysis process, you did the homework so that you're planning what your support strategy is, what your care and feeding strategy is for the life during operations of that device, right? You've built all that in, because that's when you have leverage. Okay, don't wait till warranty's over. You're standing in quicksand. Even if it's an in-house strategy, you're standing in quicksand at that point. You need to plan ahead. And that positions you with that business plan that has all of that breadth and depth of data that's been turned into information. Remember, data is just numbers, right? You got to turn that into information. You have to be able to tell that story in the business case. I mean, would you say that's what a business case is? You're sort of telling the story of why it's important to buy this and what happens if you don't, right? You gets you to this middle part of the acquisition process where they make the decision. Are they going to approve, say, yes, this is a good business case. We're going to, we want to fund this. But when they say we want to fund this, that doesn't mean that they just handed you the money. They haven't necessarily allocated it. So there's another resource you can read about this in terms of being prepared for that, to know when they're going to actually allocate the funds so that you can quickly move into the procurement part and the rest of the cycle there, right? So this is something, this whole cycle plays out. Does it make sense that it applies to the widget and to this, your service strategy, how you acquire what you need for your service strategy? I have to admit, I was sort of doing it, but didn't think about it. And then it was like, oh, God, it's sort of easier when you realize you don't have to do two different things. You're really just doing one thing, and it's just a different product. I don't know. I found that made my brain happier. Okay. These are the resources I use, and then I pull this together. They're resources I use on a regular basis. Obviously, these two depend upon whether or not, who my client works with. I'm sure all of you guys you might have one or the other or both. My recommendation would be go talk to whoever owns the subscription, because there may be more there than you know. I've run into this several times, especially with ECRI. I haven't run into as many folks with MD Byline, but with ECRI, there's more data than just the recall alerts or the list of suppliers and the product compare. There's a lot more data in there that you may find valuable to these activities, as well as your day-to-day. So find out who owns that subscription and ask what you're signed up for, and then have them, if you're not on, have them sign you up so you're part of that subscription and you can get trained. Many of these all of these here are Amy resources. These are the two down here in the left-hand side. Sorry, I don't know my left from my right. Are the white papers that are free. Some of these others are free. Some of them are very low cost, whatnot. But those are the resources we used. And that's what I have for today. You guys had great comments, suggestions, and questions. Are there more? Yes, Al. Wait, you have to wait for the microphone. Sorry. We're not leaving WebEx land behind. No attendee left behind.
A couple of comments. First of all, on the spreadsheet that you developed with the scoring, that's why you do this, right? It is to raise the level of awareness. Going back to your example of the tissue processor, you'd be amazed the lack of awareness of the executive folks around where their equipment lies in its life cycle, right? When I first did this, they were shocked at how much of our inventory was at or above 150% of AHA estimated useful life. It's like, how did we get here, right? So you start providing this, trust me, your CFO is going to be one of your best friends, okay? The other comment I wanted to make is when you present that, I suggest that you sit down with your CFO ahead of time to walk through the scoring methodology and the associated weighting ahead of time so that you agree on that, so that when you do present the report, they're not arguing about the validity of the numbers.
And maybe even go, because I love that, and thank you for saying that, Al, but maybe even before, because you're going to build the technical one for sure. And remember that that's a living document. That's an example I give you. Sometimes it's a little different based on what data is available, but that financial, to create the financial one, maybe you want to go to the CFO ahead of time, show them your technical, here's what I'm doing, but I'd really like to make something that looks a lot like this, that's a financial view. And so we can talk about financial end of life and whatnot of the device and get that buy-in even way before, because you're going to need his or her assets, his or her people to pull some of that financial data to support that. We got one in the back, and then let's take one more in the back there, and then let's make sure we got the web folks. I've been on these web things.
I'm guessing the central topic is like money, right? We need funding to, from our, to provide the service. So I'm no genius, but when you present it to the committee for purchase, for approval, I mean, you collect the total life cycle cost to maintain that.
Mhm.
You know, and so I don't know if that's presented in the committees. So when you're, when they want to buy this $10,000 piece of equipment that's proprietary, but requires $10,000 a year service contract,
Mhm.
so they're actually, they're buying $100,000 worth of
Right.
cost up front.
Right.
That way they're committed to that in their budget in advance, and you can hold them to that at times.
You could try, but yes, and that's a good point. That's why you want to do this service contract management analysis like thing. And you may not have taken notice, but the part of the circle, this says value analysis. Your supply chain partners are already working in a world that is trying to balance on the supply and consumable side. They're looking at the clinical world and the financial world and their own logistics world, because there's the cost of the product, there's the preferred clinical product, and there's also how the Sam Hill do I get it from here to here, right? How do I make sure it's available? So they're already used to looking at multiple criteria to make a decision. When it comes to the gear that we support, the medical devices, we're adding another data element, if you will, or another perspective to the conversation. But you have to sort of be careful about saying, here was the total cost. Do it in a manner that shows because you don't want to lose. You're not only responsible for the big iron things that are going to cost, this costs $3 million and it costs another $10 million to support it for the life. And, and that jumps to the top because it's a big number. You don't want to lose the fleet devices, the beds, the tissue processors, the infusion pumps, or whatever, that actually on a day-to-day basis keep the hospital running, right? And that it tend to really hurt the health system, and they don't know that they're basically dying a slow death. It's terrible. Was there anything on the web?
Yeah, I wanted to say the virtual attendees were just asking about the slides, but those will be up on our website, and this will be recorded, so you guys can get this next week. But we'll take one more question.
Super.
When I worked in the hospital, one of the things that was very important for biomed was to be on the evaluation committees.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at the new things, you can help assess them. The other thing is we used to write into our purchase agreement, we used to write in the training for biomed.
Mm-hmm.
After all, your most efficient and at least the cost is to be in-house. Then you always look at us independent service organizations. Last would be the manufacturer. They'll charge you the most. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you raise the point that you have to look at your organization, because we're all exactly the same and completely different. Okay. I mean, that's just the nature of healthcare. And so you do have to look at what drives the most value for my organization. And I think I come from an in-house tradition. But I learned a lot of the things that I'm talking about here because I spent a window of my professional career with a group purchasing organization, because doesn't everybody want to? Anyway, it was great because I learned the business of healthcare, right? It was no longer about just my little corner in the basement. Understood the bigger picture and the bigger drivers, or all the drivers, not necessarily that they're bigger or more important one, but there's a lot of drivers here, and understanding kind of what my environment has to be evaluated. And your point about being on the committee is spot on. It was important back then. It's important today. Find out how your health system does their capital process. Are you in a larger organization that has 27 committees? Because each one of them is like, here's the surgery and the imaging and the lab and the this and the that and the whatnot, and make sure you got representation on all of those, right? Or if it's one committee, it might be one committee that does everything in the acquisition process. That's okay. Get somebody on that committee too, so that you have a voice. And sometimes it's not about answering a question. Sometimes it's about asking a question, right? And it's a great opportunity to learn. Why is that important? Wait, like the gentleman in the back that said, could you please re-explain what this number is? What are we measuring here? Those are great questions, because you know why? You learn, but they stop and have to think just like we do. Well, what is that measure? Okay, I have to be able to explain it, not just do it, all right? So there's lots of opportunity for you to really drive performance improvement by just participating, by not just showing up, but truly participating. Thank you, everyone. I am available. My contact info is on the slides. And if there's anything I can ever do to be helpful, reach out to me, email, call me, and maybe we'll get to work together someday. Thank you.